Years ago, when I first set out to write a book about working with people with disabilities, I intended to write a fun book about a segment of the world that most people know nothing about and a career that most people know nothing about, and that is working with people with disabilities. I'd written about 90% of the book when I had an incident in the workplace that led to me ending up with a diagnosis of complex PTSD. Now, I had to put this book down for 10, 12 years. I couldn't read it, couldn't think about it, couldn't have anything to do with it. Then I picked it up one day and I realized that I didn't recognize the person that I was writing about. I knew it was me. I knew that it was things that I went through, but I didn't recognize myself in it. And I felt many different ways about that person. I very much don't like that person because the choices that he made have led to my life being what it is now, which is a lot less than what I hoped for. In this book, I'm honest in a way that I don't know is normal, but I wanted people to understand what I went through, why I went through it, and what the experience was like for me. This is chapter 3, and I can tell you it gets harder from here. I do hope you enjoy continuing to hear the story of my life as a disability worker, particularly working with violent clients. This is chapter 3. You can check out chapter 1 and 2 on the podcast. And of course, chapter 4 will be next week. Hey, as always, I want to thank you for listening. Please like, share, subscribe. I'd appreciate it. Anyways, let's dive in and see what happens. Welcome to Mark My Words. Mark My Words is the story of my journey from a place where I was shattered to where I could live again. BUMWIPER Chapter 3. I used to work in one of the most frustrating, underappreciated, thankless, and least understood jobs in the world. I worked with people with disabilities. And in hindsight, I can say that I was pretty good at it. Not perfect, and by no means the best, but I got the job done. I wasn't so good that I didn't get crap on my shoes sometimes, but good nonetheless. I got into the gig by accident. I had just been fired from a dreadful job at a supermarket, and my mum suggested it. The pay was okay, better than at the supermarket anyway, and the hours, being shift work, were pretty flexible. I was promised the world: great hours, great pay, great co-workers, and more. See the world, meet new people, and wipe their bums. Afternoon shifts would be the best, as I could sleep in and then spend my mornings at the movies or surfing, and then go off to work at the reasonable hour of 3 p.m. Or if I started early, I finished in time for an afternoon surf or to meet up with friends. What was not in the brochure was the crap, the sticky, smelly poo, the bane of my life. But shit was an evil that I learned to live with. Also missing from the job description was the amount of violence and abuse I would be subjected to. The plain truth is that when I started in the sector, I had no idea of the world I was in for. It was to change me in many ways, but also seemed a good fit for me. I had the fundamentals that I would and do consider to be necessary to work in the field. I was a flexible person, very adaptable to new places and people, and most importantly, I had a good sense of humor, or at least I had one when I first started out. Day one was one of epic learning for me. My first job was in an institution that catered for up to 14 residents. The institution was called a hostel. The hostel was society's first real attempt to create institutions that were in no way related to the old mental institution model where patients were locked up and treated as criminals just because they had a disability. This hostel was a respite house, which meant that, in theory, none of the clients was supposed to live at the house permanently, but were placed in the house for short periods of time, anything from 2 days, but in extraordinary circumstances for up to 2 months. I was never able to decide who was getting the respite. Is it the family getting a respite or break away from the burden of their disabled child, or is it the child getting a respite from his or her family? More often than not, I think it is both. So it was that if a family needed a break or had abandoned their child and no one knew what to do with them yet, that child came to us. What was particularly interesting about working in a respite house is that no particular day was ever the same. In the respite world, it is the clients who determine what kind of day you have. The constantly changing clients made each client, and thus my experience with them, completely different. And the differences were many. Are they male or female? What type of disability do they have? Are they violent? Do they have other illnesses as well as their disability? How much can they do for themselves? These are all different factors that would alter my day and would dictate what kind of day I was going to have. Another thing that had a dramatic effect on your day was the other staff that you were working with. And sometimes they could be more difficult than the clients. But we will talk about that much later. At this particular hostel, the regular staff were very wary of new staff, in particular, of staff of the male persuasion. At that time, 1988, the staff ratio was about one male staff to about 15 females. At that time, the work was not popular with men because it did, and still does, require a man to drop what would be the normal expectations of the male role. For instance, to this day, I hate making a bed. I never ever do it at home. I quite simply don't get the point. And I carried that attitude with me to work. Once I got a client up, I would tidy the bed somewhat, but wouldn't really give it much thought. I assumed that anyone that cared to have the bed really neatly made, most likely a woman, could do it themselves. I know for damn sure that the client didn't care. This attitude almost got me fired in my first month. Not a warning or a request to lift my game, but a threat that if I didn't make beds, quote unquote, properly, then I would be let go. I was told that I excelled in every other aspect of the job, but if I couldn't make a bed correctly, I was out. At this hostel, the expectation was that once a client was woken up, I was responsible for everything to do with that client's routine, including making the bed and cleaning them and dressing them, washing the clothes, doing the ironing, and everything else that a man is not supposed to do. After my brush with imposed early retirement, I towed the line. I can say categorically of that experience that later in my career, I can say categorically of that experience that later in my career, I would be just as angry as my boss was at the time with anyone that held the same attitude that I used to have. Though, for the rest of my career, I tried to ensure that all of my clients had doonas, and I would never insist on hospital corners on the sheets. That's what fitted sheets are for. Back to my first week. Now, the staff at the hostel had a fun little test for all new staff. After a short induction, which was always and still is in most cases completely inadequate, and an interminable session of reading through client files and routines, the new staff member was sent up to room 13 to meet a lovely little boy called Chris. Now, Chris was an intellectually disabled boy who was unable to talk and who also had cerebral palsy. Due to the palsy, most of his body was completely stiff. He always had to use a wheelchair and had only very limited use of his arms. It is a fact of life that life in a wheelchair is very uncomfortable existence. So we tried to give him as much time out of the chair as possible during any given day. We couldn't put him on the floor because the hostel was so busy, he may get stepped on, and he didn't like to be on the couch in the lounge room. He had a TV and a VCR in his bedroom, which he much preferred. So here we have a 13-year-old little boy who can't run outside and play, can't feed himself, can't communicate even except on a very basic level. So what does a little boy left in a room do to pass the time? Well, this little boy did a poo and then proceeded to smear it all over himself, the walls, and the bed. He would paint his face. He would stuff it into his nose and ears and eat as much as he could. That's right, eat it. This actually happens a lot more than you'd think. When you walked into the room after one of his sessions, all you could see was this little boy covered in feces and feces finger painted on all the walls up to about waist height, which is about as far as he could reach. I can give you a basic idea of what the room looked like once it had been redecorated. But what I can't do is draw an accurate picture of how insanely bad the smell was. Words are barely adequate to the task. Everyone who does this job for a living learns to live with all kinds of smells, good and bad. And most of us develop cast iron stomachs. However, even the toughest of the tough would, and frequently did, begin to violently retch when they first came in contact with the smell that came from Chris's room. Now, I know that there are going to be those of you out there that are going to ask, well, why don't you put him on a toilet before you lay him in bed? Well, I'm glad you asked. We did, all the time, especially before a session in his bed. But as with the old adage that you can't lead a horse to water, well, the same is true here. You can lead a boy to the toilet, but you can't make him poo. I know some of you will ask, why not give him a suppository, make him poo? Well, we weren't allowed to, still aren't. In my field, the vast majority of hands-on carers are not medically trained staff. No, all we could do was coax him, cajole him, encourage, and beg him not to play with his poo. But seriously, put yourself in his position. We told him when to wake up, what to wear, what to eat, what to do during the day, what time to go to the toilet, what to watch on TV, what to drink, whether he was going to have a shower or a bath, when he was to go to bed. He had no control over anything. Sure, we gave him small, easy choices, such as we would ask whether he wanted Wheat Bix or cornflakes for breakfast. But unlike you and me, if he wanted toast, then he was out of luck. Each staff member had 3 to 4 clients or more to get ready, and we didn't have time to make it for him. If the one and only area of your life that you have control over is how and when you take a dump and what you do with said dump, then that's what you do. Such was life for a person in the care of a large institution. So it was into Chris's room that all new staff members were sent, especially after having a creative fart session, as I used to call it. For me, the first experience was enlightening and probably exactly what I needed. First of all, I found out instantly that I have a cast iron stomach. Poo, the smell, doesn't bother me at all. Sure, the room smelled like Satan's toilet on a bad day, but to my surprise, it didn't really bother me that much. And cleaning the room wasn't all that bad. Not pleasant, to be sure, but overall, it wasn't that horrible. I got there before it was too dry, lots of hot water and a quick scrub, and I was done. After I thoroughly cleaned the room and Chris, I was confused as I could still smell the poo. On a sudden inspiration, I moved the bed and found a rather large pile of marble-sized poo balls. Chris had painstakingly rolled tiny little pieces of poo into perfect little poo balls, and he'd hidden them behind the bed. I reported this to the other staff, and we had a round table about it. In the end, we bought the guy a bunch of marbles, and the antics with his feces did actually slow down a little. They didn't stop altogether. He still indulged his need to be creative from time to time, particularly when he was angry at someone. But the instances of the behavior occurring did decline somewhat. A quick sidebar to that story is the story of a woman who started a couple of weeks after me who had the same trick played on her by the staff. She showed up, had her induction, read the files, met some clients, and was sent to room 13. 13 was in the other wing, so it was a good 5-minute walk away from the office. Approximately 6 minutes after leaving the office, the woman walked back into the room, her face as white as a sheet. She didn't say one word. She just picked up her bag and walked straight out. Someone jumped up to the window and shouted incredulously that she was getting into her car. We crowded around the window and watched her disappear down the street, never to be seen again. It's interesting how the job affects some people. For us, after the laughter died down, we slowly came to realize that we were one staff member down now, and our pity for the woman was suitably short-lived. A couple of days after my first day, I received the next of the many jolts that confirmed that I was in a whole other world. A young girl came home from school, her legs covered in blood. I can tell you I freaked out when I found her. I can remember thinking, oh my goodness, she's hurt. I took her straight to a female staff member who, to my surprise, simply smiled and told me that she was okay. It was just her period. After breathing a sigh of relief, the blood rushed from my face as the senior staff member went on to say that now was as good a time as any for me to learn how to clean her up. After all, she reasoned, the time may come when there are no other women around and I may have to do it. Better to get it done while help was available. Her logic was undeniable, and I used to instruct staff to do the same thing. As much as possible in the changing world where men have as little physical contact with female clients as a form of protection for the male staff member. So with the advice of clean her up and stick a pad on her ringing in my ears, I was sent off to do my good work. Now here I was, 18 years old, an absolute novice in the secret ways of women, and I had to sort this little girl out. I took her to the bathroom and I got her to clean up as much as she could, which was not much, so I had to help a lot. When she was clean, I had the idea that something had to go in her pants or in or on her vagina. I'm not sure how I knew, but I started looking for the mysterious things that I had only heard about in hushed whispers in the playground, tampons. Thankfully, I remembered the advice to stick a pad on her and came across some pads. And trying to comply with the stick it on her, I went about sticking the pad on. The only problem was that the damn thing wouldn't stick on her or the undies. I tried everything. I was even about to try some sticky tape. But before I did, I had the brainwave of asking someone for advice. This was truly the first time I needed it, and it was a great lesson. In this field, you will never look stupid if you ask for help. That is, of course, unless you can't figure out how to put a pad on. I found all of the women staff sitting at an outside table drinking coffee. And heedless of the ridicule I was about to receive, I barged right in and asked the questions that at times haunted me as probably the stupidest question I've ever asked in my life. Holding up that pad, still sealed in its pack, I asked, how the hell does it stick on? Amid a roar of laughter, as it was explained to me that I had to unwrap the pad from its paper. Accepting the laughter, I shrugged and wondered why I hadn't thought about that sooner. Anyway, on the way back to the bathroom, I had another thought. And I do maintain that to this day, yes, I actually was thinking. I still wasn't sure where the sticky bit went. To the girl, or to the undies. Now, I've told this story a million times and to many different people, and the reaction is also always the same. How could you not know? The answer is simple. I am a man. Further to this, I have to now ask, how the hell could I learn? How the hell could I know? It wasn't like my mum or my sister was ever going to sit me down and tell me the sordid facts of their monthly cycle and how they deal with it. They were so good at hiding all traces of their monthlies that to this day, I am quite sure that my mum and sister have never had a period. God forbid any of my girlfriends would do so either. At that age and time, I was a babe in the wood. I had no idea about any of this stuff. So, after turning back to face the crowd of my caring and compassionate colleagues, and again in a cloud of roaring laughter, I found myself heading back to the bathroom to deal appropriate with the pad situation. Apparently, the pad was supposed to stick to the underpants, not the person. Good to know. Another thought I would like to share at this time is that to young men, when they hear this is not a funny story. While at the same time, women find it hilarious. I think you know why. This little adventure has had a profound effect on my life as a whole. Needless to say, I now have no compunction about going into the feminine product aisle of the supermarket for my wife or daughters. In fact, I seem to be sent there quite a lot. Even when my first daughter was born a month early and I had to go out and buy a breast pump, I was not fazed in the least. And I put it all down to this experience and many others like it. Another learning experience I had in my first week was when I was asked to take a large man across to the local shopping centre for some window shopping. For the purpose of clarification, I must give details here. Although the man looked completely normal, he had an intellectual disability and he was very, very big, at least 140 kilos. The young man was fine on the walkover, more than fine actually. He was an angel. Cooperative, responsive, and willing to accept direction, e.g., stop and look for cars coming at the pedestrian crossing. Even our window shopping went without a hitch. He didn't cry when he was told we didn't have money to buy any little trinkets, snacks, or a Coke. The trouble came when it was time to go back to the unit. In a quiet and non-confrontational way, I told him it was time for us to go home. You can imagine my surprise when, without warning, he drew back his fist and punched me square in the face, then started screaming and attacking passers-by. No one at work had bothered to tell me that this man hated being in the hostel and didn't want to be there. His thought process was that after we went shopping, we would be going to his mum, which is where he wanted to be anyway. So when I told him that we weren't headed home, but back to the hostel, he went ballistic. He flailed at me with his fists, teeth, and kicked out in an uncontrollable frenzy. At this stage in my career, I hadn't been taught any self-defense tactics or any restraining moves. We were not allowed to restrain a client in any way unless we had a documented contingency plan in place or we are trying to protect the life and limb of ourselves or of others. In this case, I did what I could. When he tried to grab an elderly lady, that was the last straw for me. I put him in a bear hug and tried to get him out the door into the car park, away from any other people he could harm. Even now, in the light of all the years of experience I have under my belt, I think my plan was a sensible one. But, and it's a huge but, I hadn't been informed that this gentleman had a severe case of a type of claustrophobia, and he didn't like to be touched by anyone, even his mum. So here I am on the back of this 140-kilo madman who I'm infuriating even more by hugging him tightly against myself, and he is trying frantically to buck me off. I don't really remember much of the next few minutes, but I do know that I had him by the legs and as he was lunging at an absolutely terrified mother and daughter trying to get away from us. So at this moment, to my immense joy, two policemen came running over to help. Instantly, my giant friend calmed down and rushed over to the cops. He bursts into tears and starts crying, "Mummy, I want my mummy." To my surprise, I was wrenched off the ground by one of the cops and he started screaming at me, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I was dumbstruck. I looked around for any witnesses to attest that I had heroically, to my mind anyway, thrown my body in front of the passers-by to protect them from being hurt. But the area was now understandably deserted. The cops asked me who I am and what's going on. I told them and pointed out that I worked just up the road at a hostel. I got no further. The older cop says, "Fine, we'll take you." I had no further chance to talk. I didn't realize I was in shock. And anyway, the cops had made up in their mind that I was beating up a disabled person and that I was a particularly nasty piece of scum. So even if I did say something in my defense, I realized now that it would only have gotten me into more trouble. They turned to the client and say, "Let's get you home." To my astonishment, he happily complied and skipped to the police car. I didn't feel so well and followed at a more sedate pace. We arrived back at the hostel in less than 3 minutes, and the client leaps out of the car, cries thank you to the policemen who were his best friends now, and rushed inside. I dragged myself out of the back seat to be confronted by my new friend, the older cop. He stopped me dead in place, grabbed me by my shirt front. "You make me sick. You're lucky I don't charge you right now," he screamed. "If I ever see you treat anyone like that again, you won't make it to the cells. I'll deal with you personally." With that, he hopped in the car and they left. I headed straight to the staff bathroom. I didn't feel well and knew that I had suffered some damage. In the mirror, I could see straight away that I had the makings of a black eye, a chunk of my hair had been ripped out, I had a nasty bump above my right temple, and scratches all up and down my torso. A fellow staff member rushed in because the arrival of the police car had not gone unnoticed, and people, understandably, want to know what has happened. His exclamation at seeing my injuries assured me that they were in fact as bad as they look. I used to take pride in the fact that I was the only person that got hurt in this incident. Neither the client nor any member of the public was injured in any way. Now, though, in retrospect, I can think of at least 10 ways to ensure that the incident never happened in the first place. Why was I sent out with a violent client to a situation that was extremely dangerous with no briefing whatsoever? I know why. When the client got to know me better and saw me as an authority figure, he would never have reacted violently to me. The other staff had been around him so long that they had lost the force. The other staff had been around so long that they had lost the foresight to ensure that the client was always taken out by someone he knew well. The regular staff had taken him out thousands of times and never had any kind of issue. This was to be a theme for the rest of my career. As staff turnover in the disability sector is huge, hard-won knowledge is often lost with the departure of a typically burnt-out staff member. Management are often so removed from the situation and so focused on their own careers that they don't have time or the inclination to look hard into the clinical history of the clients and to ensure that critical information is always readily at hand, especially to new staff. This particular incident taught me a great lesson, which was as true on my last day of working with clients 18 years later than it ever was. Whatever happened in my job, whatever the client did to me, if a member of public saw a client get out of control, I was always to blame. It usually came out as, why did you let this happen? Or if you knew he was like this, why would you take him somewhere he could hurt people? You may be inclined to ask if these incidents are extreme or exaggerated in any way. I assure you they are not. In the disability field, they are not even particularly unique. Each and every staff member who works in the field has their own quote unquote war stories. Every person who works in close contact with clients with behavioral issues will go through it many, many times in their working life. There was one more noticeable event that happened in that hostel. It came a week before I left. On a particularly hot day, I'd been sitting in the staff room eating some chocolate with some other co-workers when we got the call that little Chris was having another creative fart session. I volunteered to clean him up and soon had Chris and the room sorted out. As it was extremely late into my shift, a colleague sent me off to clean myself up and to write reports. After writing the reports and helping myself to some more chocolate, called out a farewell to my teammates and left and went home. 2 minutes into the drive, I glanced down at my shirt and saw a gob of chocolate left over from the office. It had clearly melted in the heat. I immediately lifted a finger in order to scoop that leftover treat into my mouth. After all, why let good chocolate go to waste, I thought. My finger was just about to hit the chocolate when a tiny voice in my head said, "Is that really chocolate?" I glanced down at the glob and was instantly repelled. Sure enough, I was to find to my disgust that it was not chocolate. This is the closest I have ever come to eating poo. Now for a reality check. As I read through this chapter today, I am a different man. I know that I am the central narrator, but I do not recognize myself as that person. He is, in many ways, a stranger to me. I can see the danger he is in, and I know the damage that these incidents are going to have on him. I want to scream at him to get out, find another career. He has many other talents and skills. He need not be trapped in a world that is slowly killing him. He does not know how much his pain will debilitate him in later life. What he thinks of as resilience is no more than ignorance. Over the years, he will see the signs that his mental health is at risk, but he will ignore them. He will assume that they are temporary and are simply weakness. I pity that man, but I also detest him. He will miss opportunities to move into other careers such as radio broadcasting, acting, or even management. He will ignore these opportunities because he believes he is a man of principle. He believes that what he is doing is important. What he does not realize is that eventually, even with all his years in the job, the hard-won and valuable encyclopedia of experience he carries means absolutely nothing. In the end, he is replaceable and easily forgotten. His entire life's work will amount to nothing because he thinks he is being selfless. The man I am today is living with the consequences. I now live with CPTSD, complex post-stress disorder, and I have symptoms of severe and clinical depression and anxiety. I have survived a suicide attempt and have lived with suicidal ideation for at least 15 years. At the time, it never occurred to me that I was experiencing trauma. I never saw or recognized trauma in any of the events I've just described and the events that I will continue to describe in this book. I now know, after many painful years, that I was living in and existing in a physical state of heightened anxiety and fear. This is crucial because I never, ever considered leaving a career that I loved. Not once, even while I was in the emergency room for x-rays, concussion, or stitches, Did I consider the damage I was suffering? Did I consider the Not once, even while I was in the emergency room for x-rays, concussion, or stitches, did I consider the damage I was suffering physically or the potential damage to my mental health. I never thought that the damage I was taking at work was extraordinary or unusual. I now know that these and hundreds of other experiences over 18 years were destroying my mind. The incident that truly broke me was not unusual or even an event I had not been through before, but my ability to handle a serious threat to my life at that time completely corroded. That is the end of chapter 3. The book is BUMWIPER. It will come out soon. Please like, share, subscribe. I appreciate it. I appreciate you listening. Have a great week. I will talk to you again soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to Mark My Words. I'd like to thank my producer, Meredith Brosnan, and also Torian, Kevin, and Lorraine. And I can't forget the band Adelaide, who allows us to use their song as our theme.